We have some massive updates from the Minnesota Vikings ahead of their week against the Seattle Seahawks, and a game that we need to get another win. We're going to be talking about what implications this will have on the game, as well as some absolutely insane stats that The Athletic has recently released to compare this Vikings team to former Super Bowl winners, and I'm sure these stats will shock you. We're going to be talking about all of that here in this video. Now, before we get into it, though, we know that 91% of you guys watching right now are not subscribed to the channel. If you're looking for a spot to get all of your Minnesota Vikings news, you're in the right spot. Hit the sub button, join us here on the channel. We are covering everything Minnesota Vikings. But without any further ado, Griffin, let's get into the Seahawks game first, because as we know, this is a major week for the Minnesota Vikings, and heading into this game, they're going to be facing some challenges they have been yet to see this season, which is the weather. Now, the weather has been not really an issue for the Vikings in the past, but this game is going to be the first of the season where we are seeing rain the entire day. Now, I do know this is very small, and I do apologize. This goes hour by hour. I don't know who came up with the screenshot, but they probably could have put it, maybe every 2 hours or something, but it shows rain throughout the entire day. So it seems to be that the Vikings are going to be playing in a rain game, the first of the season, but this is also just going to tie into what we have later on regarding some of the stats about how the Vikings can really adapt to the weather and how they can make these changes ahead of the game. We know that the key factors in Jefferson, Addison, and TJ Hawkinson will likely be a bit of a lacking piece in this game if it is raining as bad as it seems. Now, of course, still have quite a bit away until this game, so hopefully this does change, but this means that we're really going to have to rely on Cam Akers, Aaron Jones, and Ty Chandler if this is bad as it looks like. So, Griffin, how do you expect this Vikings team to really line up against the Seattle Seahawks here in this game, especially when we're looking at the rain pattern that we are right now, and the fact that we haven't yet seen this team fully in a weather scenario, or weather-dominant scenario?
Yeah, the boys better pack their ponchos to head out west because it's going to be a wet one and it's going to be a rough one if it's going to be as rainy as it seems like, especially considering the weather games that we've seen in the rain this season. Green Bay and Detroit, that was an ugly game. San Francisco, and that was an ugly game on Thursday against the Rams. There was another ugly one last week. Cleveland and Kansas City this past Sunday, that was another ugly one as well. So weather games like this typically are not the prettiest. So if Minnesota is able to come out with the win, it's going to be by pounding the rock, making sure they get it into the end zone, not kicking too many field goals, as good as Will Reichard is and has been this season. With the weather and the wind and the rain, you don't want to leave that up to chance, especially when our kicking history against teams like Seattle, not exactly the greatest track record. I think Geno Smith playing is the biggest question mark in regards to the game as a whole, as far as how Minnesota's chances are looking, especially when coming down the stretch. Seattle and Green Bay, everyone's saying like, okay, we just got to win those two games, then we got to take care of Detroit in the finale. But Seattle and Green Bay, those can still be trap games because Green Bay plays us really tough in US Bank Stadium. Seattle's a team that has typically played us tough over the years, especially in Seattle. So if the weather plays into a factor on that when they are already in their home stadium, if Geno isn't playing, I'm feeling a lot better about it. But if Geno is playing, I think that's going to be a major factor on how the weather affects this game as far as slinging the ball too on both sides of it.
Exactly, and yeah, Kenneth Walker is another thing that we have to keep an eye on as well. Not playing last week, Zach Charbonnet really has taken a major step up when we've seen Kenneth Walker out. So the running game in Seattle is very good, whether it is dry, whether it's wet, whether it's snowing, whether there's a hurricane, whatever it may be. This Seattle Seattle run game is very good. So the Vikings are going to have to kind of match that, especially if this weather is good. And even as good as Will Rickards is, as you said, you can't beat science. It's just very hard to kick a wet ball, especially that's not a round one. So as much as we like Will Reichard and happy to have him back and, how good he's been, we don't want to see him kick the ball in this game, especially if it is raining. But as I mentioned, these stats that we're going to show you right now that are absolutely insane will really come hand in hand and really show how this Vikings team will be able to adapt into this weather and really into any scenario that they put themselves in this season. And I'm very excited to go over these stats, Griffin, because we've seen these from The Athletic earlier today, and these are bringing in some very good looks for the Minnesota Vikings ahead of the playoffs now that they have finally clinched. And first of all, we will get to the run game in a moment, but first of all, I want to pull up the first one that is coming through from this article from The Athletic, which is in comparison to the last 10 Super Bowl winning teams. So every graph that we see here is against the last 10 Super Bowl winning teams. And we're looking at the first one here. The expected point average per play. The Vikings are 25, so they're up there with the top with many, many teams, but the explosive play rate is one thing that I really wanted to kind of focus on for this graph here. 18.7%, highest of any team here. no, I don't want to say by a lot, but when you're putting it into perspective, that 18.1 that the Chiefs had in 2022 to 18.7 the Vikings have this year, that really is a big difference, especially since the small sample size that NFL games will have. And looking at this, we know that even in some given scenarios where we probably wouldn't expect a big play, the Vikings have not been scared to do that. Whether that is, of course, Aaron Jones running the ball like he did on a specific play, I believe it was 3rd and 17 last game, on really any other given play that Kevin O'Connell or Sam Darnold has been willing to try. And I really don't doubt they try this in the rain. A lot of teams probably wouldn't, but the fact that the Vikings really have the ability to adapt to any type of weather, have the ability to run the ball in the rain, and really just, or have a ballsy play calling, this would not surprise me to see any really explosive play in the coming games, especially in Seattle and, as you mentioned, in Green Bay, where we are really a bit uncertainty against these teams and really have had the struggles in the past. So how do you feel about this stat, Griffen? I'll kind of ask you about all of these as we go through them. But for the explosive play rate, the expected point average on this one, what do you think the Vikings are looking like comparing to the last 10 Super Bowl winners?
I mean, it's crazy that they're even being regarded with that because that's just great company to be in. You see those teams, those Chief teams where they had guys like Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire when he was doing his thing. Tom Brady led the Bucs to the Super Bowl as well with weapons like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Matt Stafford did the same thing with Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, and Odell Beckham Jr. and all those guys. The Eagles, all the weapons that they had in that unfortunate Super Bowl winning season that should have been Minnesota's. So having them put up there, not only amongst these teams, but leading these teams, goes to show that this team can hang with the big boys. That if they need a big play, they can reach into their bag of tricks and get it. Whether it's Sam evading a sack to just make a massive play downfield where a guy's open, or just making sure it's something over the middle a few yards out and then they're making it happen from there, or it's even a check down to Aaron Jones where he just takes it and is off to the races. So seeing that is very nice as far as how Minnesota's looking heading into these playoffs. I know I've already been looking at tickets to New Orleans just to see what the price would be if they were to make it. I've always wanted to go to the city wherever they make it, not to the game, but to the city. So I think New Orleans would be a great place to go. And I think with this stat there, I think that does bode well for their chances a lot because when teams have them backed up, they can still get those big plays and get those momentum shifters going.
Yeah, as you mentioned, having these guys line up against teams that have won the Super Bowl, and I'm not sure if they've done this with every team, I didn't check, but the fact that the Vikings are even considered, as you mentioned on this list, is something that we have to be excited of regardless of what happens, just because of the expectations, as we mentioned last video, that this team has had heading into this season. And before we head into our next chart, we have this one here as well, which is another very interesting stat, and this seems like an obvious stat to start with. A team's margin of victory indicates its level of dominance. The Vikings are plus 117 through 14 games, trailing only the Lions, Bills, and Eagles. 3 teams that we may see at some point in the rest of this season. Lions definitely, but Eagles and Bills perhaps at another point, but none of the 5 previous Super Bowl winners teams have led the NFL in point differential. All of them, though, slotted somewhere in the top 10. That the Vikings are where they are is unquestionably a positive sign. And this kind of goes hand in hand, Griffen, what you had to say in last video as well, that the Vikings don't necessarily want to have Kevin O'Connell as coach of the year. We kind of want to be in the middle of the pack, maybe second or third. But the history really just shows that if you're at the top, you never really have the best chances of winning the Super Bowl. So I know you were a big guy on that Kevin O'Connell idea. So what do you think about this one of the Vikings having the plus 117 point differential, but still trailing the Lions, Bills, and Eagles, 3 of the other dominant teams in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, they're in great company. I think those are the 4 best teams in the NFL this season. Unfortunately, 3 of them, or 2 of the other ones, I should say, we're one of those 4. The other 2 are in the NFC, one of them being in our division. So I don't entirely love that, but hopefully someone like Tampa or even LA, they can take care of Detroit or Philly along the way in the playoffs so that we can have a much better path to the Super Bowl. Hopefully, I know it's the playoffs, anything can happen. But I would much rather be playing a team like the Rams or the Bucs at home rather than having to go to a place like Philly or Detroit or even having those teams come into there. But that point thing is a big one where Detroit Lions, they've been boat racing teams all season. Now we're starting to see that, hey, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And what's happening with that and with them going through this marathon, the wheels are starting to fall off a little bit. Players are getting hurt here and there. They're not able to just keep pace like they were earlier in the season. They were just out boat raced by the Buffalo Bills. Where were those 52 points that they were putting up against Dallas, against Tennessee? Now you got to see where now it's time to nut up or shut up, and now we're going to see what teams are really made of, and hopefully that's where Minnesota is finally finding their stride.
Yeah, and our next and final two graphs are really going to play into this effect as well over the next few games, but also against Seattle. So I'm going to tie these two in together here, and I'll pull up on the bigger screen here. So for this one, we have the rushing side of things, and once again, the Vikings are not the best at rushing this year, but yet Aaron Jones has exceeded every expectation that he has had. However, when you're looking at the past Super Bowl winners, it's been around this level, 4.1 yards per carry, whether that is, of course, Ty Chandler early on in the season, Aaron Jones, Cam Akers. They've all found success at some point this season. And this is going to be a big thing to look at heading into next game against Seattle. So, with the rushing side of things, being in the middle of the pack is something I don't mind the Vikings having, especially with the weapons that we have up front and available for, really any other scenario other than Seattle's game next week against the Vikings. And the fifth and final one is the turnover differential. This is also going to play a big part in the game against Seattle, especially if there's raining. We cannot afford to have, whether that is Zach Charbonnet, whether that is Kenneth Walker, or whether that is both, being able to just hammer the ball against the Vikings defense in the rain, especially since they're very used to it. That's going to be a big thing the Vikings are going to have to cover with and really deal with heading into this game. So looking at the turnovers as well, we have some of the most in the NFL with still more weeks to go at 20, but the defensive turnovers are the big thing. 28, most on this list already, and we're not even done this season. So it just goes to show how much the defense has been helping out the offense and vice versa, and this is not going to be any different from what we're going to have to see in Seattle. So Griffen, how do you think these two charts here are really going to play into the end of the season, heading into some of these more important games, as well as next week in Seattle?
Defense wins championships. And with, like you said, with the weapons that Minnesota has, the rushing hasn't been as much of a concern as it has been in the past, where when Dalvin Cook was only getting 4 yards per carry, it was a concern because of the other weapons that we did not have around him. Now we have Addison, Hawkinson, Jefferson, Johnny Munt, Josh Oliver, Brandon Powell, Trent Sherfield, all these guys where it takes a bit off of Aaron Jones. And as far as the turnover differential with defense, defense wins championships. We've seen that time and time again. And Minnesota is the only defense this season with a takeaway in every single game this season. So if they can carry that into the playoffs, make teams have mistakes, and make sure they make them pay with points off turnovers, it's going to be a lot easier of a journey to the Super Bowl for sure.
Yeah, a lot of these stats very, very fun to actually witness and see against other Super Bowl contenders, but we're still not done the job. We clinched the playoffs, but we really need to secure our spot into a good setup, a good lineup, and even these games for the next few weeks are really going to dictate how this team performs when it matters, I guess we could say. At this point, right now, we're still kind of evaluating what's going to happen, where we're going to play and everything, but we still need to win these games and really prove every team that the Vikings are not just going to roll over and die. We're actually going to put up a real good fight, with a lot of people thinking that we're not going to. So a lot of fun stats here. But Griffen, you got anything before you finish this one off?
Can't wait to head into a rainy game against Seattle, hopefully come out with the W, and then bring it back home to Green Bay before heading over to Detroit for all the marbles.
Absolutely, I completely agree. But that's all we got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. But we're signing up. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later.